Larchmont Library is a friend to all of us, always, especially in times of need. Outages were not the issue this time, but when that happens, as it did during Ida, the library is a refuge with power and Wi-Fi and computers. So please consider joining the Friends because your contributions help us support the library in good times and in bad. Our wonderful volunteer from the high school is handing out membership forms in the form of a bookmark, so you may pick one up on your way out. Much as we'd all like to forget about it on days like this, flooding is the price we pay to live in this beautiful village and the surrounding towns. The big question is, what can we do about it? Our stormwater infrastructure is decrepit and damaged and way older than all of us. Some of the pipes are clogged and corroded, and at least one of the main outfalls that spills water into the sound is below sea level. Our beaches this summer were repeatedly closed because of pollution spillover. On Friday, our streets became rivers. We're tired of bailing out our basements, and we feel helpless when the rains come. Our guest today, County Executive George Latimer, really is someone who needs no introduction. We're truly grateful that you're here, George, even as you're dealing with this state of emergency. You're a good friend of the Friends and to all of us here. Larchmont was hit hard the other day, as were many surrounding towns. The village has begun to mobilize and inspect the underground pipes. We've found issues, and we appreciate that members of the board have come to this program. Thanks also to LMC-TV for filming this. For those who were unable to attend, you can access, or you can tell people to access it either on YouTube or online on the website of the LMC-TV. We're eager to hear everyone's ideas and plans for remediation, particularly what state and federal grants are available and how we can apply for them, and also what homeowners can do in the meanwhile. So welcome to George.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I don't know if you think I sincerely mean it when I say I'm happy to be here. But I attend many of the meetings of the Friends, and have a lot of friends in the room, and so the different speakers that come I find very interesting. So Jackie, who I've known for years and years, said, George, would you like to talk about a particular topic at some point? I said, sure. Pick a topic that you think would be relevant, that I'm involved with at some level with the county. And we had a long conversation. We thought we might be talking about gun control. And we settled on stormwater. It was about 60, 90 days ago, I forget when. And of course, we couldn't have had more time on the topic. And I understand that when you have a conversation about something that doesn't affect you in the immediate moment, it's an interesting conversation. It's esoteric. Maybe if something interesting is said, you talk about it later over dinner or over drinks with somebody else. But when it's affecting you right now, as it is me personally too, right now in my basement on Wainwright Street in Rye, it's not just a conversation. It's real world, and it's hitting home. I've had the good fortune to represent Larchmont, Mamaroneck, and a lot of different levels of positions over a long period of time, and I've seen elements of this problem from different sides, you know, from being a municipal official, from being in the state legislature, the county legislature, and now as county executive. Much of the problem that we have is fairly intractable in that it represents issues of topography and geography that we can't change, you and I, but we have to figure out how to mitigate it to the best of our ability. We're going to talk briefly, you know, about some of those things, those structural things, the climate and the weather, and then also the government structure, because one of the frustrations that everyone has is that many of us who are in government at different levels have a piece of the puzzle part. We have members of the Larchmont Village Board who are here. We have members of the Mamaroneck Town Council. Jane Eny, your town supervisor, is here. You have past elected officials who are here who have struggled with this. And we have to figure out, as we have, I think we've already begun to, figure out how do we work cooperatively to do these things, understanding that any ultimate fix on this is going to require the support of the federal government. The costs that we're looking at, the complexity of the issues at hand are greater than what the city, the town, the village, the county, and the state alone can do. Because what I can report to you, when I sat amongst you as a county legislator, as Catherine Parker is now, I've represented Larchmont, Mamaroneck, and Rye. I now have responsibility for 45 communities from one end of the county to the other. And I spent Friday and Saturday driving to places 20, 25 miles away from where we are that were also badly affected by what happened. This is much bigger. If you watch the news reports, it's in northern New Jersey, it was in Connecticut, New York City, Brooklyn got hit even harder than we did in Westchester County. So this is a macro issue, and it requires macro solutions. And this is those moments when we have to do the work we have to do. But once we get it to a certain point, it will absolutely require federal assistance for that to happen. Let me mention, first of all, a couple of the basic divisions of the issue. First of all, how flooding affects you as an individual in your home and how it affects us as a community depends on things that are very much tied to the geography and the topography of where you are in your home and what the topography of your neighborhood is, and then by extension in our communities. Here on the Sound Shore, which got the worst of it on Friday, and had the worst of it at some of the other floods, but not always the worst of it. Sometimes the floods hit the Hudson River side more severely, and there are other parts of the county that flood. The fundamental reality is we are in Larchmont, Mamaroneck, Rye, we are downriver communities. And the way water flows, we understand by gravity toward the larger bodies of water, Hudson River, the Long Island Sound, that's what drains the water out of our area. And Larchmont, Mamaroneck, Rye, have those bodies of water come down, whatever accumulates, whatever ground saturation, whatever runoff, it meets the Long Island Sound in our communities, and when there is high tide, then that water backs up first into our communities before it backs up further up the line into other communities, which means it is a very, very prominent issue in this community, although not every single person faces it because of the unique realities of your particular home. I was on a street in New Rochelle where, as I talked to the various neighbors, and they were pretty hot, you can imagine, there was a person whose next door neighbor got 2 feet in his basement, he got none. And I said, what explains that? And then they walked over and I could see the land, the way the land was shaped. The water drained into this guy's house, not this person's house. And without question, the person who lost valuable things in their basement, is furious. And this is an expense for them and a frustration and all those different things. But from the individual side, you the individual, the tool that exists is an imperfect tool, and that is FEMA at the federal government level. And it takes a presidential declaration of emergency. Generally, it is the governor of the state that asks the president to make a presidential declaration. And when the president makes that declaration, that opens up the gates for resources. For those who may have gone through the last round of flooding for Ida, and that hit Mamaroneck Village particularly hard, not that it didn't get hit hard by this last flood, FEMA was an inconsistent partner in these things. There were any number of people who had bad experiences not getting what they thought was fair through this process. But except for what we as individuals have in terms of personal insurance, flood insurance in our home, flood insurance or FEMA are the two avenues, or going into your savings account or your resources to fix it at a moment's notice is what's available to the individual. And that is an imperfect tool. And that is where all of us in local government try to be helpful and advocate and help you get to the right person. But the bureaucracy at the federal government for the individual is difficult to navigate. And so for those of you who are suffering, my damage isn't uniquely bad. It's workable within our own resources. But for those who have something that's more difficult, we look forward to, we hope, a federal declaration, presidential declaration of emergency, which will open up the FEMA door, and that would be a source of resources for the individual. For the community, the process is not as complicated in concept. It's more complicated in execution. It's a very simple process, and the process is assessment of the vulnerability for flooding in every single part of every single municipality. 45 municipalities, and every municipality has different neighborhoods and different elements of those neighborhoods. Just Mamaroneck town alone. You have 2 incorporated parts of Mamaroneck. The village of Mamaroneck is an incorporated part of what is the town of Mamaroneck. The village of Larchmont is an incorporated part of the town of Mamaroneck. Then you have the unincorporated section. The unincorporated section has an arm that goes down Homix Road out to Homix Oak and Homix Road. You have another arm that goes around the other side of Larchmont down Dillon Road. And this is what 32 years of representing office tells you, geography that nobody ever asks you about. And then, of course, you have parts of Mamaroneck that have Scarsdale Post Office, and people don't realize that way up at Murdoch Wood off of Griffin Avenue is also the town of Mamaroneck. or the area that's off of Old White Plains Road, Marlborough Drive, and those streets up there that seem like they're, in another town, are part of Mamaroneck town as well. So what has to be done in every one of these communities, and the county's role is to assist financially with the communities in doing this. It's the first stage, which is the community assessment of flood vulnerability. And that has changed, the degree of vulnerability has changed over the years as there's been more development. There's development within the community and there's development outside of the community. And those developments come under, this is a very important element of all of this, local home rule. New York State is a home rule state. It gives land use authority not to the state itself, not to the county governments, but to the individual municipalities. Community A, village, community B, city, community C, town, has the planning and zoning function, and they determine what they're going to authorize, what their rules are. The rules are different from community to community. Community A develops at one level, community B develops at a very different level. And what that home rule does is it makes it very difficult for community A to solve its flooding problems if the next door community B is not addressing their flooding problems. And the county doesn't have the authority to tell them what to do. We have to be the convener, and that's what we've tried to be, to get clusters of communities together to work through in some cooperative fashion the projects that are needed to reduce the amount of flooding that we face. But home rule is a very important element in all of this. Each government has its own ability to determine how they're going to develop. And in some cases, where you're going to restrict development, because you want to restrict the amount of impervious surfaces, you run into a collision. The person who owns a piece of land, sees the value of their land developed to the maximum legal authority, does not want to be told that they can't develop it to the maximum profitable level. Remember having a conversation with a person back when I was on the Rise City Council, and he said, I inherited this house, I've been counting on this house when my parents died to get X number of dollars. And you're telling me I can't get all that because you want to put restriction on me. I said, well, sir, the restrictions, if you develop to this maximum, you're going to affect your neighbors. You pretty much know what he said. I don't really care about my neighbors. So these are some of the fundamental problems that a municipality deals with. Nonetheless, the first process is assessment, to assess what the problems are, to document them, and not just to document the anecdotal sides of it, where you talk about, I lost this valuable heirloom that meant a lot to my family, but a cool assessment of what happens when the flood waters reach a certain level, and what levels of water, it takes how long for the letters to go down, where they drain out to. And right now in the town of Mamaroneck, we have an effort that's almost at final fruition, not quite, that Jay Nini has taken leadership on. I see some of our other council members are in the room, in which Mamaroneck is going to do a town-wide assessment of flood issues all across the town. And they're different from one part of town to the other. And the county's assisting, was it $300,000? Yep. The county's assisting with $300,000 to help make that happen. Now, the assessment is going to take a certain amount of time, and rains can come during that period of time. And so the assessment itself is not the solution. But the assessment is essential, because what comes out of the assessment is the second phase of this, which is the identification of the projects that would mitigate flooding, what they look like, how workable they are in the world of engineering. Those of you who have an engineering background, you pretty much know I don't. We have ideas about what we'd like to see, and then a person sits down and practically says, this can be done, this can't be done, this has to be done this way, this has to be done this way in order for you to accomplish some of what you want. And one of the frustrations that we face every time we deal with this issue is that in many cases we can make the situation better, we can reduce the risk of flooding, we can reduce the likelihood of flooding for certain kinds of flood incidents, but no one can guarantee that it will absolutely eliminate the threat of flooding the next time around. And when you get the kind of rains that we had on Friday, or the Ida rains, which were actually worse in September 1st of 2021, go back to the 2007 flood. I was at the time an assemblyman. I had offices on Mamaroneck Avenue. I was working in my office on a Sunday evening when the waters started to come, and if I didn't realize how fast the waters were coming, it would wash my car into the Mamaroneck River on that portion of Mamaroneck Avenue. Got out of there just in time. And then, of course, we had a 2015 flood that was pretty severe as well. And this idea of a 100-year flood is, fantasy. If I had any magic wand, I'd say stop calling it 100-year, 10-year. Just call them Category 1, Category 2, Category 3. And then you have like 4 Category 4 floods in a row, then you'd know what the magnitude was, rather than trying to put that metric of years in. But the bottom line is, when we look at that second phase, the planning and the engineering, we have to come up with what we think are workable strategies that can be physically created to reduce the amount of flooding. An example is to create retaining ponds or retaining bodies of water. If we're sitting in a river, pick any river you want, water flows down this way to the sound. When you have high tide, and that's like a stopper in the bathtub, more water pours into the bathtub than the water starts to splash out. That's your flooding. Some of that water is coming downriver from sources north of you. It's draining in, and then it's ponding up and coming down. An engineering strategy is to create a retaining pond of some size and depth at some point in time so that it can hold the water back with some dam, sluice gate type of function, and by holding that water back, that water is not adding to the water further downstream. An additional, type of thing, you can have some sort of a gate to regulate it, so you keep it up at a certain level, hold it to capacity, and then let it out in smaller quantities, and in theory, you relieve some of what that problem would be. However, in that same story where you're standing in the middle of the river, some of the water's coming this way, you can retain it. Some of the water drains this way. And it's not so easy to retain that water. And people will talk about what do we do to take this excess water that's coming in a singular fashion. Ideally, you've created some sort of underground capacity to retain water on a site. Well, how easy is that going to be to do with existing properties as we have it now? But something where more water wouldn't drain down, it would sink down into the land where it falls. When you think of how much impervious surface has occurred, every time there's an office building in a parking lot, and we prioritize housing, that we want to have affordable housing, and affordable housing takes a site of this size and puts more housing on that site. That's a social good, but that social good creates more impervious surface, more runoff, more water in a system that gets overloaded very easily. Another element of engineering that they'll come back and tell us is we have to expand the size of our pipes. And for any of you who've gone through any kind of trench work in the streets you live in, how frustrating is that when Con Edison comes in and they have to take up a pipe? Or it's Westchester County, it's a sewer pipe. It tears your road open. It takes you months before you get back to anything that looks like normal. The road's never quite right. You have to do a whole other repavement process of that road. We're just getting to start a repavement on Murray Avenue in the next year. Catherine Parker went to bat for that, and we were able to put it in the budget. And I dread the thought of the repaving, not because it's not necessary. What if we find something we have to tear the road up? You just repave the road, and then a year in, you have to tear it up. But nonetheless, part of the infrastructure improvement, Jackie said it, we have older pipes. This area was incorporated and developed at a much earlier time than, say, Long Island was. Much of Long Island's growth came after World War II. Our growth, in many ways, was before that. All the little signs, Larchmont, 1891, Mamaroneck Village, 1896, I think, all these different years. That tells you when we started to have roads and stormwater systems and so forth created. But those things have to be identified too. So that's in the planning and the engineering stage. The mother of all projects that has been discussed in this area is the one in Mamaroneck Village. And there the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in, this is well over a decade ago, and they analyzed the Sheldrake and the Mamaroneck rivers, and they came up with a plan that at the time was priced at $80 million that would improve, not completely wipe out, the problems of flooding in Mamaroneck Village. $80 million at the time. That project is now $100 million because of the cost escalation. It's one project, one community, addresses much but not all of the flooding, and not all of the flooding in Mamaroneck Village, because some of the flooding happens on Beaver Swamp Brook, which goes through Rye Neck in the village out to the sound. The county has committed $17 million to that $100 million project. That is a huge amount of money for the county government to spend. And then the village is on the hook for a certain amount. I forget what their number is. Mayor Murphy has just put out a note to people in response to what's happened to show what the progress is being made. The planning and engineering step, the assessment step, underway in certain cases, not in every single case, planning and engineering, and then the finance piece of this. And this is where a $100 million project is, there's one example of a project. let's say Larchmont Village does its analysis, Mamaroneck Town does its analysis, New Rochelle has analysis, Rye, Portchester, Bronxville, you do the math. If everyone has a $20 million project, which is not unrealistic, it could be $20 million to address flooding in each of these different communities. You do that multiple number. If the county is good for 20% of it, which is stressful, and people stop me on the street, what are you doing about my taxes? We've actually lowered them the last couple of years, and we've been able to manage it well. But these capital projects, impact what we can do on the tax side of it. And people will say, I can't afford it. You pay a lot more to the school tax than you pay to the town, the village, or the county. On the other hand, the quality of your schools are valuable. You have a great school system in Mamaroneck. We have a great school system in Rye City. So you're always juggling between different social goods and social needs. But the finance side becomes very critical. And that's where we turn to, obviously, our state legislators, folks who've served in positions that I've served in previously. Steve Otis and Shelley Mayer have been terrific to work with on these issues. When they get to the table, Eric Katz could tell you chapter and verse on this. When they get to the table, I can tell you what it's like, because I was in both of those two positions. I walk in to speak to some senior person. I say, well, I need money for Larchmont. Larchmont, Latimer, you got the wealthiest Senate district in the state. Which is pretty much true. And they say, so you want me to direct money to Larchmont and Rye, and Brooklyn needs the money. That's what you fight when you're trying to get access to money that you need, because you can't do these projects unless you get money from higher up the line. It's as simple as that. And so we have to make a persuasive case of these things happening. There are some times when you're dealing with the reality of the individuals who are affected by flooding. I'll give you the alpha and the omega. In our backyard, there are examples of this all over the county. If you go to Rye, if you know the geography of Rye, just north of the heart of Rye's little shopping district, there's a neighborhood that borders the Blind Brook, which is the major creek stream that goes through Rye City, called Indian Village. All the names like Oneida and Mohawk and all that. That is a rather upscale neighborhood. The homes are worth quite a bit. And if you go up either that street or Wapanoka Avenue, take a drive if you're so inclined to do this. And the people who have homes on those streets, to the greater extent, have raised their houses. It's probably about $250,000 to raise a house. Not every house can be raised, depending on the circumstances. But you'll look, and they look a little funny. They don't look the way they do if they're on grade level. But those homes have put themselves now one full floor above with mechanicals above the water. In houses like that, the people have the resources, they think they get the value back, so they do. Different street, different community. Howard Street, Leicester Avenue in Mamaroneck, right around the corner from where my offices were when I was in the Assembly. You have people who are middle class and some that are below that, hanging on with houses that aren't worth investing $250,000 in raising them. So you look at that, and your objective thought is, we should buy the house out, tear it down, and keep the land as land not to be built on. Because whatever you build on that property is going to flood. That's the reality of it. But the reality of it is there isn't sufficient money available in our world of government to buy out 20, 30, 50, 100. I don't know how many, if we started doing that, I don't know how many of those kind of places I'd have to authorize, where the homeowner just doesn't have the resources to raise their house. And so we get ourselves caught in trying to come up with some mid-level structure on finance that would address some of those different things. We have, in the county government, the strict direct responsibility for county-owned land and the flooding that we generate. Now, the county does not own, as much land as people might think. We own Saxon Woods. We own, and we own the county center complex. We have playlands under our ownership. Some of the other parks that are regional. Glen Island is ours. Wherever we have sites that contribute directly to flooding, then we have the direct responsibility. In all the other cases that we're dealing with, the county is a regional partner to deal with the local government in trying to help fund these things. And so what we're trying to do now through our capital projects is to prioritize what are the projects that a Larchmont Village needs, what's a project that the Mamaroneck Town will need, this will come out of the study, and how much can the county contribute to that effort across the board. And at the same time, put the money into the things that we have direct responsibility for, flood remediation. All of this seems very esoteric if you got flooded at your house, right? You live on Willow, you live on Elm, you live on Cherry, or you live on Ervilla Drive, or if you're up in the town, you're somewhere off in North Chatsworth, Rockingstone, Poplar, I know the names of all the streets. Any single person that has lost their basement to flooding is angry. And they want to know, what are we doing about the flooding in my backyard? And the answer to that is, it depends. It depends if what's causing your flooding is a structural problem that affects the community at large. There's an underground stream, and we have to figure out how to retain the water further north. That's a community responsibility. It's not the responsibility if the way your house sits on your parcel of land, water ponds up around your house, or if you're sitting on a piece of land for which water accumulates underneath it and then bubbles up to the base of your floor. That's not something that the government of any level can come in and address. I assume that as you're dealing with, as we are, dealing with taking care of the immediate problem, that I'm bringing in somebody to say, explain to me, just like the village explains to the village people, what is it that's causing me to have flooding? Is it something simple, or is it something very complex? Well, George, you have porous walls on your basement, and you need to put a new outside layer of coating that will protect them better from the water that seeps in. You know, it's a good idea to fix that window that the water comes through. Oh, that's pretty obvious. And that's where this assessment process is both an individual assessment process and a community assessment process. So that we take a look and we see what is it that's causing the flooding that you're personally experiencing. If it's everybody on your street, that is, that's a concern that then the community has to respond to. We have responsibility for major routes, travel routes around the community. Bronx River Parkway is owned by Westchester County. Now, you are well aware that the roads, the major parkways, are named for the rivers that they are adjacent to. Hutchison River Parkway, Sawmill River Parkway. Now, for those of you who are married, I assume that's the majority of the room. At some point in time, the person that married you and your spouse said, and now the two shall become one. Well, you know, you get the rain like we did in the Bronx River, and the Bronx River Parkway are now one. And so our mission in situations like that is to close it down and keep people off the parkway, because we cannot possibly make that parkway passable until the water drains out, and the water won't drain out until low tide. We had a project which the state was responsible for and did a very good job on it. You may know this if you know the geography of the county. It's north of the Hawthorne interchange on the Sawmill River Parkway. They raised the Sawmill River Parkway. It was about a 2-year, 3-year project. It's right around Marble Avenue in Thornwood. Whoever knows the geography, you know it. That survived pretty well this rainstorm. I don't know the dollar amount of that project. It was the millions. But when we're going to have a conversation about this tomorrow, of course, it's our first day where all of us are going to be in the offices. How many of our major parkways can be raised in that fashion? Some can't be. And if you drive the Bronx River Parkway, there are certain depressions in the road where you can't raise it up because you've got a small overhead bridge. And so they're just physical impediments to doing this across the board. But we look at that and we say, okay, how critical is it for us to keep this roadway open at what cost to make it passable when a situation happens like Ida, or like what happened on Friday, because there's a cost factor involved. And so we're going to have those conversations. That relates to our roads. We try very hard to prepare in advance for these things, and as we get into the colder season, preparing in advance is preparing in advance for snowstorms that come. So the water comes down as snow, creates icy, dangerous conditions. Same thing, you shut the road down so that people don't get on it. I will tell you, as I drove around on Friday, and I went through about 15 different communities, I could not believe people who thought they could get through standing water that was probably up to my middle of my chest, and they took their cars through, and I see the cars stalled out in the middle of Central Avenue and Yonkers and Greenberg. It's amazing to me. But people do what they think is right. You got a barrier across the street, somebody goes around it, and they're out there in the water. That's a sideshow issue. I promised Jackie I would stop at the bottom of the hour, which I'm almost up to. Here's the bottom line in practical terms. Those of us who are in public office, we have to complete, as fast as we can, the full assessments of what the flood vulnerability is in every one of these communities. And we have to be as universal about it as we can. Every nook and cranny street, everyone I popped off the names of a few streets, the Larchmont village officials have to look at every street in Larchmont, and the Mamaroneck town officials look at every street, and come up with the list of what's needed. And then, here's the tough part, because if you're not in the top priority, we'll get to you as soon as possible, prioritize them. What are the 10 most important places that we have to tackle right now that will have the greatest amount of benefit? And when you're 11 on that list, you're not happy. I get it. But we're not, if the list has 30 places on it, we're not going to be able to get to realistically all 30. So, as the municipal governments do that, they have a partner in the county government financially, to the extent that we can, in helping them do the studies. Some of them have studies that have been done recently, some have been partial studies, and they have to expand them to include other areas. Whatever that is, there are at least 2 of those 45 municipalities in the room that I can see, and maybe there's Mamaroneck Village too, so that's 3. I have 42 more of them to do. And when you talk about a community the size of Yonkers, Yonkers could be like 10 communities in terms of its size and scope. So we have to get that assessment done. That's my commitment to do that as fast as we can, and we will be public in the announcements about these things when they're done. And then we get to the engineering planning side. I don't know if Dave Gavinga has joined me yet. I don't see. Oh, Dave, are you here? Why don't you come up front here? I want Dave to be available as a resource because we're going to go to questions. And David is our assistant commissioner in the planning department. He is familiar with stormwater work for a long period of time. And a question that may come up will be over my skill set to be able to handle. So, David, I'm going to tap you to do that. But in that planning and assessment situation, we have to be realistic about what are the projects that we can actually implement and how much improvement will that give you, so that you have a real understanding of the sense of that. And then on the finance side, we have to look for situations where we can get the money necessary. I would say one more thing on that before I close my comments. There was in the federal government an infrastructure bill that did pass with bipartisan support, minimally bipartisan, but it was bipartisan support. There's a lot of debate about whether or not we should spend money on that. And there are people who oppose the compromise that kept the government running because they don't want to see government spending in certain areas. There was an Environmental Bond Act, $4.2 billion bond act, which voters passed a year ago at Election Day. But it wasn't passed unanimously. It was at least 30% of the people that didn't support it. There were individuals that did not support it. All I can tell you is this. If we don't do the infrastructure bill, and if we don't do the Environmental Bond Act, there's no money available to solve these problems, period. And I understand that people, philosophically don't want to see government spend, don't think we're honest, don't think all of those things. And I get that. It's a free country. You can say what you want. You can say things that aren't true if you want. It's possible. And you can put them all on social media if you want. Next door seems to be a good place for that. But if we, as citizens, don't back up the public policies necessary, then we're not going to solve our problems. It's not just George Latimer and the politicians. It's all of us. And the solving of this problem comes because Mother Nature doesn't give a hoot who's in office. They don't give a hoot where the dotted line. She doesn't give a hoot where the dotted line is between community A or B. When they decide that the high-pressure system and the low-pressure system has come over the Cape Hatteras coast and is moving toward New York, or a hurricane comes into New Orleans and finds its way to hover over this area for a day, we're going to have flooding. The mission is to try to make it as least as possible. That's my commitment for my time. I have a couple of years left more in this job and do my very best to do that. So I thank you for your attention, and then we'll go to questions now. Jackie, do you want to recognize people for questions? Or do you want me to? Okay, I'll do it.
Please repeat the question.
Okay, and I'll repeat the question. When I point you, I'm going to ask you to stand up so your voice can project. We'll start in the front room. I don't necessarily know everybody's name, so this young lady with the white top, please. Stand up and...
Hi, I'm Lori Murray. I live in the village of Mamaroneck, but half my street is in the town and the other half is in the village. When you talk about assessment and the Army Corps of Engineers, it sounds like the village of Mamaroneck may have already done a study with each individual street. Is that study public information because it seems top secret? And how do we find out what would be we live in the same street?
Okay, so in answering your question, let me give you the universal answer to some of your questions. Copy down my email address. Here it comes. Because when you have something specific, And if I don't know it and David doesn't know it, we'll have to find it out for you. So send me an email, Latimer, Latimer, Latimer at, it's kind of long now, Westchester County, NY.gov. Latimer at Westchester County, NY.gov. And then just ask that specifically. I think if you're in a borderline situation like that, you probably have had your street included in it, but we'll err on the side of safety. You'll send the ask. David, I'll probably send it to you. Email, David, check into this. Blanca, check into this. You know, any good CEO will tell you that's what they do. But we'll try to get an answer. Okay, a couple of rows behind you, young lady on the aisle, purple top.
Thank you for everything. This information has been very helpful. I'm from New Rochelle, and I'd like to know if you have any information about the project that they have started, drainage analysis study. I think it's 2 years now, and I don't think anything has really come from that study that we've gotten any information or any.
I'm not personally aware of any things I've seen. Dave, have you seen a progress report on that?
Yes.
Can you address it?
Briefly, yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we actually had a meeting scheduled with the city on Friday, and because of the rain, it has been postponed. But we are getting back to them. They're nearing the end of that study. That was along the Hutchinson River, and they are approaching the county to talk about some projects coming out of that study. So we're hoping that we get things moving on and moving forward quickly.
That wasn't just addressing the river. They had broken the city up into sections, and each of the sections were being identified independently, as far as we know.
Yes,
And Pine Brook is where we are located. There's a small group.
Yes, we are, and we are aware of those studies as well, and we're working with the city on that. I think the city had some other grant funding, other funding sources for those, but we can talk about that, and we can give you whatever we know about those, or give you contact information for those folks in the city.
Okay, so you'll
Send me the, let me
send
jump
me
back.
the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Send me the email,
Yeah.
and if you have a group of people, you know, and you want me to update them all, include their emails in it. So when we do one response, everybody will get the email.
No,
And
we're
then,
a small group, and I'll be very brief about this, a small group from a co-op with 2 buildings in Rochelle. And
Okay.
we had 5 feet of rain, of water coming in from above us, opposite roads of us. And the first floor of both buildings is totally underwater. And this happened in Ida, but this time it was even worse. It's more both buildings. And it's really.
for some reason that I don't know, New Rochelle got more water this rainform than I saw the listings, and I'm not sure why.
They actually told us we couldn't pump out our boiler rooms because all the drains were filled.
We're filled.
We had to hold 2 crews there trying to pump out to keep our boilers running, and we weren't able to. That's how much water was in the boiler rooms, and of course in the elevators. So the elevators, we've been down since last week, Rick, in the elevators and the boilers. So it's really critical to us. We're in a unique position. We're a little bit lower from Larchmont on Palmer Avenue, opposite a hill with a lot of new homes that were built since
Right.
we were built, and a lot of the water comes right down, goes right
So
down.
like where Sun Haven is, it comes
Yes,
down that way
exactly.
into
Spencer
Palmer where you
Drive,
guys
yep.
are. Okay.
That whole area there. And it was, even coming down from Larchmont, it was like a river, people took a video of, 4 feet of water running down Palmer Avenue.
Right.
Down, it was really.
If you don't mind, summarize that in an email. And by the way, let me give you my phone number too, the office phone number. It's 995-2910. Anybody's going to send an email with a specific question, follow up with a phone call, because we get God knows how many emails a day. And when you call, whoever answers the phone says, I just sent George an email on such and such and such. Can you make sure that he sees it? Which generally means they'll print it out and they'll give it to me in my printed mail folder. So I'll look at it, I'll read it, I know it's there, then I know I need to refer it.
I know the council, they're having a meeting, an open meeting on October 10th.
Okay.
So we'll definitely be there en masse.
Did you know about that, Dave, the October 10th meeting?
No.
Make a note of that, have somebody, we'll find somebody to attend.
I'll include that in my email as well.
Okay.
George, let's move on to the next question.
Thank you.
Please repeat it when you.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Thank you.
forgive me.
Could you just let everybody know that phone number you gave, is it a 914?
Yes, it's a 914-995-2910 number.
Thank you.
Way in the back on the end, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple quick things. One is I'm wondering whether the county has explored porous pavement or the possibility of legislating that when new development happens, they are required to put in porous pavement. Because I feel like that could help, and it might not.
Do you want me to go one question at a time?
I don't.
Because so I can repeat it. She wants me to repeat the
Oh,
question.
right.
She's asked me about porous pavement, if the county has investigated it, and if we have legislation that would require it. I would have to look to see whether our authority could legislate that or not. I know we have the authority to do that on our own facilities. So if we were to repave Saxon Woods parking lot, then we would have the power to do that. Whether we can mandate that outside of the county, I do not know. And, you know, David, I hate to do this to you, but if you could make a note of the motion. Sorry.
We do use porous pavement.
Okay, and David advised me that we do use porous pavement to the greater extent. That's the county usage. Your question is broader, and we'll have to check with the law department.
So when the guy across the street from me builds 2 houses and paves the whole thing,
Yeah.
and I get water in my basement.
I am almost positive that would have to be a municipal decision in land use, but I don't know 100% for sure, so I'll check it out. It raises the issue of the ethics of those in the real estate industry disclosing to prospective buyers the flood vulnerability of the site before they sell it. I'm reasonably sure that would be state legislation. That would be across the board. Eric is nodding and said yes. Eric, do you know by chance if there's something like that?
We actually just recently chaptered into law an enhancement on the flood disclosure law, which really didn't have a lot of teeth. So as of maybe a week or 2 ago, there's now much more stringent standard for when you sell your property disclosing prior floods.
So why don't you see that young man, Eric Katz, and he'll link you up to whatever the document is so you can see what the state has done to try to make it more. The comment was about corporate contributions to flood remediation, and that's certainly something we could look into. I don't know that we have at this point, but that won't be on me. I'll discuss that with our economic development people. We might tie it, most likely, to the area where the corporation is based. So if they're based, purchase, then it's a purchase-related action that might be helpful. Okay? I'm gonna just go back and forth around the room. Somebody's hand was up over here. Marlene, was that you?
Yep.
Okay, Marlene.
I just have a quick question about, you had one project that you mentioned that had been relatively successful. My question to you really is, how successful, we're going to spend a lot of money on assessing what's going on. The flooding keeps changing because the climate keeps changing. And so, where is the assurance that almost whatever we're going to do, the Army Corps did things 100 years ago and now it's a mess. So my question is, what kind of assurance can we have that we're really going to be doing something that's meaningful for people
Well,
who need it?
what Marlene said is, how do we have an assurance that the money that we spend will help accomplish the problem and solve the problem, particularly with, I think what most of us believe is that the climate has been changing, becoming more severe, and we're seeing a greater pressure on the system because of that. That really is a $64,000 question, because the concern I think that we all have is that what we've seen is a more rapid repetition of difficult weather. I just try to think when I was a kid, how often did I see this happen? And from time to time, I remember Agnes hurricane came in '72, but that was a hurricane. Hurricanes are more understandable to me when it's a major hurricane that comes straight to us, rather than these incidents that don't come as sort of the leftover Ophelia tied to some either high or low, whatever the meteorological thing was. So I don't know what our confidence level is, Marlene, about that. I think we go through the process as best as we can, and then we try to determine with engineering professionals, if we do this, will it help? I do know that when the tide is coming in, I don't have an outfall pipe that can take water from here that's flooding up and push it out over and above the water that's coming in at high tide. I mean, common sense, I know that, and the more we have those kind of situations, that's not solvable. On the other hand, I'm not sure that channelizing some of our streams, dredging, water retention basins, changing the aperture of bridges, that water ponds up behind, that some of those measures won't make improvements in some sort. So it's a balance between what we can do, how much good it'll do, and then how much it'll cost, so that there's that balance point. Gentleman here in the blue shirt.
Hi, my name is Evan Goldfein. I'm here with the Pine Brook Neighborhood Association on Pine Brook Drive. I hear laughing because people know about Pine Brook Drive. There's a
I think we know that you have a real problem.
We do have a real problem. There's a 1,000-acre watershed that comes to a culvert, and the smallest point before it goes to the ocean is my house. Right. So we get, on a regular storm now, the storm drains reverse, we get 2 to 3 feet in the street. On a big storm, we get 6 to 8 feet in the street. And so periodically, our houses are messed up. So that's like a community-wide problem. It's not just our house. My concern is that the assessment that you're saying we need to do in our neighborhood has gone on for 20 years. So, and probably more, right?
I've lived there.
Yeah. So the studies that I'm aware of that have been most recent, there was one in 2006 which recommended a pumping station. There was one in 2008 that recommended increasing the culvert size. Then it was pushed down the road. There was another study in 2015 that said maybe we should go back to the pumping station idea. And we've been waiting for a fourth study to be done for about $200,000 since 2015. So we've been waiting 20 years to go from the assessment to the last assessment before something can even get done. So I want to know the progress of that last bit, and how do we have some assurance that the assessments are going to lead to...
I don't want to put her on the spot to respond, but Bridget Brennan from the Village Board is here. Bridget, would you put that on your grocery list of things to assess?
Yes.
Would the two of you have a conversation, just so that we can make an understanding of it? And our interest in the county is in knowing if all of these assessments are complete. If we know, now here's what we do, we need a pumping station, if that's what it is that we need, and what the cost of the pumping station is, then, I don't know what the additional assessment would accomplish. I'm not sure if that's what you deal with. But I want to stay within the lanes of each government. Larchmont Village is the one that's dealing with this, and Bridget, you can speak to the mayor and determine, I don't know if there's any of the village trustees in the room.
Yes,
But-
why don't we talk afterwards? I'm happy to follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Then we'll go to Jackie.
Other than FEMA money, what infrastructure money is available from the federal government, and how do we access that?
Well, the infrastructure bill that was passed, that President Biden made much of, is really the new source of money that's available for a wide variety of infrastructure.
Right.
It can include roads, bridges that have nothing to do with flooding. It's incumbent upon us to bid for that money, and that would be a governmental process. And what we would do is put together a consortium of communities to ask for X number of dollars to do X projects. And it really isn't something that an individual would apply for. But that is appropriate. And then a companion piece, which I alluded to, was the $4.2 billion Environmental Bond Act that was passed by the state. Now that's targeted to environmental activities, so environmental infrastructure is more likely coming out of that pot of dough, and it would be the same situation. So let's say, I'm just going to theorize, let's say the pumping station is the answer in the issue that was just raised by the last gentleman. Let's assume that we said, okay, a pumping station is what's needed. I don't know how much a pumping station costs, X $1 million, $5 million, I don't know what it is. But that would be a project that the village would partner with whoever else up the line, most likely the county and the state. And we'd say, okay, we could get $1 million out of the Environmental Bond Act, the county would kick in $500,000, the village would do $500,000, and then we'd go to the feds to try to get the balance. It's exactly what I'm doing right now at the Lake Isle Dam. You familiar with the Lake Isle Dam in Eastchester? The dam needs some repairs. It may be in the vicinity of about $10 million. The county led the way. We committed 2, and then the state came in and said they'd do 4, and now we're applying to the feds for infrastructure money to do the balance of it, to make the final repairs on the dam. And that's how we would piece it together. Okay? Here we go. There's a gentleman, right? Yes, sir. I was trying to see the color of your shirt. I couldn't even see that from my
group. So, just a question about private insurance. So, I understand the issues with the public authority, but are you in contact with private insurance? Because after 3 floods, there's risk of not finding insurance or having your insurance through the insurance. Because FEMA is not the long-term solution. Do you think that the chance that some insurer will leave the area?
Well, that's one of the problems that exists.
Repeat the question.
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you. He asked about the problems with private insurance, that private insurance won't be authorized if there's been multiple number of floods in an area. They leave the area. There's a number of different, I'm aware that a number of different carriers won't write policies in a particular area because of the vulnerability, and what other options exist. I don't know what other options exist at that level. I would probably turn, excuse me, I'd probably turn to the state level on this one, because the state regulates insurance, the insurance industry, and ask to see what kinds of discussions have gone on in the state legislature relative to that. I served on the insurance committee when I was there. I don't recall this issue coming up as a major issue, but it would have to be addressed, the flood insurance issue. So, Eric, you're not here to take notes for the state, but would you mind just, you know, and then let's see if Shelley Mayer or Steve Otis can respond back. Again, if you want to send an email, as I've suggested, I'll make sure it gets to the right person. But, you know, the problems that exist with, you know, private insurance companies is they, like any other profit-making organization, they make assessments of risk. And if their risk assessment is such that they, you know, will lose money, then they don't extend that, and then there's nothing, as far as I know. Then you'd have to have some sort of, you know, you'd have to create some sort of a public, you know, the government would go in to do what the private industry won't do at some loss, and we would just assume, okay, there's going to be a loss of money, and we would allocate that to offset it. And that program does not exist, as far as I'm aware, unless it does somewhere along the line. Wish I could give you a better answer than that. Gentleman, right in that same area.
George, could you?
Oh, John McGar. You're getting old, John. I can't see that far.
Could you comment on the other negative impacts that flooding has on the communities in terms of sanitation and sewers, the operations of the county sewer systems, and the effect that it has on the environment in terms of the quality that comes out of those sewer plants after a flood?
Yeah, the question is the flooding impact on sewerage and other environmental things. Well, we have a great concern, because we are responsible for the sewer treatment for the vast majority of the county. The county government is responsible for it. Sewer treatment plant in Harbor Island, you know, the big tall official-looking building as you enter in. There's a sewer treatment plant on 5 Islands by Salesian in New Rochelle that's been recently improved, and then we have 5 others around the county. When we get the kind of intense rain that we get now, our system doesn't function well. We do everything we can do to avoid having to release raw sewage out into the sound of the river. It can happen, and when it does, we get fined, and the fining doesn't solve the problem. Part of our improvement of our infrastructure in our capital project is to upgrade our sewer treatment plants to make them more resistant from this. But we still have, you know, some problems with the, you know, the level of handling the amount of water that comes into the plant. And that's exacerbated by that portion of illegal hookups that exist, where people have their storm water going into the sanitary sewer system instead of the stormwater system. And every time we've tried to deal with that issue, they've been smoke testing to determine that, you know, your particular house is hooked up into the sanitary sewer system and you have to take it out. That is a hit to the homeowner. And we immediately get, you know, a meeting like this with about as many people, and they all don't want to pay to be taken out of the system. So that's why it hasn't been completely fixed at this stage. There's political pressure from those people that would have to pay, because they bought a house and they didn't know that it was hooked up that way. Probably it, you know, didn't impact anybody when it was first, you know, built at the time, but does now. In terms of the problems with flood water and the damage, it generates a lot of debris that has to be gotten rid of. And we kept our waste transfer stations open over the weekend, which is not normally the case, so that communities could get debris off the street and, you know, dealt with through our system. And, you know, we're trying very hard to reduce the amount of waste that gets disposed of at the Wheelabrator plant up in Peekskill, and we do a good job of reducing the amount of plastics and the distribution. And then something like this happens, and the amount of waste that we generate is phenomenal. And then our numbers go up, and somebody says, you're not reducing your waste. Yes, absent the storm, we would have been fine. But I'm driving around and I see piles of debris waiting to be picked up as bulk pickup as well. So it does have a negative impact on the sanitation system. If there's a response to your question, it's simply We have to try to upgrade our plants to a greater degree and try to make it as resistant to the problems of flooding as we can. But we can't make it perfectly protected to it. We run into problems at times we have to shut the system down, where we get too much water coming into the system. It's almost 5 o'clock. How many more questions would you like me to take, Jackie?
3.
3 more questions. Yes, ma'am.
So I back up to Sheldrake. I live in the town of Mamaroneck, and that's like one of those 3-town problems, because you've got New Rochelle and Larchmont owns Sheldrake. My house is in Mamaroneck. I was flooded again, inundated 2 years after Ida. Our house was built in 1938. 2007 was declared in a flood zone, so I actually have FEMA insurance. Can you give an update on what's happening with that situation? And is that a situation where the federal government would get involved? Because our houses are insured, and I'm going to have over $100,000 in payments from FEMA just in the last 2 years, and there was a huge one in '07 predating me living there.
I'm not familiar with how that program works, Dave. Do you have knowledge of it, or shall I follow up with
It's probably better to follow up. Yes, shoot us an email and we can.
Yeah, I mean, if that's not on the radar, it's surprising, because
Yeah.
it's pretty major.
I admit that I have gaps in my knowledge of how some of these programs work, particularly with the federal government as they interact with the county. So if you send an email, we'll try to address it, get somebody who can,
Cool, thank you.
who can drive it through. 2 more questions. There's a hand up in the middle of the room there. I don't know what's attached to it.
I'm Deborah. 2 questions. One is, I thought I heard in an email from Mayor Murphy that maybe the $100 million that you were talking about,
Yeah.
we got the federal funds we needed to do some work.
Yes, it's been authorized.
Is that correct?
Yes, it's 100. That's when I said earlier
Right.
about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer project that goes back 10, 12 years. It's now priced at a $100 million project. We're told that the money has been secured at the federal level, and I know the county has a piece of it, state has a piece of it, and the municipal has a piece of it. Our piece is 17 million of the 100 million.
Right, so it's
100 million
fully
is the
funded,
total?
but the work has not yet begun.
No, the work hasn't begun yet.
Okay, and
It's
that's
been-
my other question with all these storms over the years. It sounds like in many jurisdictions, we're still in the assessment stage. What has been done, say, even in the 2 years since Ida, in terms of assessment or priority determination or actual remediation?
Well, I think, the implementation of what has happened after Ida depends on the communities that we're in. So if you want an update, if you live in Mamaroneck Village, you want an update on what's happening in Mamaroneck Village proper, I would have to, dig that situation out. We've had a number of different particular things that we've done in the county since Ida, but they may not affect you in the village of Mamaroneck. We've had, as I mentioned before, flooding in Macy Park, which is tied into the Sawmill River on that side of the county. We put money into a project that related to that. That affected people over there. Isn't something in your backyard. I think we're going to have a conversation. Maybe Jane and Sarah Bauer and Tom Murphy. I know we have election campaigns at hand, so probably these things will wait until after elections are resolved. But we'll determine if there needs to be some kind of joint report to the community, just to give an update, community by community by community. Jane, if that works in the village and in the town, we can do that. I'll do that. If I do that here, I'll do that, in Rybrook, Portchester, Rye, and then we'll do it in New Rochelle alone, and each of these different communities. But that would probably be a very logical outcome of this.
That would be great.
Okey-doke. One more question against the wall, gentlemen.
We've been discussing assessments basically on a micro level, community by community, municipality by municipality. My question is, perhaps, particularly for us on the Sound Shore, we're at the bottom of the hill, what can we do on a macro level? Does it pay for New Rochelle to invest in a project with their tax dollars that helps the unincorporated area, or for Scarsdale to do the same? There has to be some inter-community cooperation, perhaps uphill, upstream. A mitigation there can mitigate downstream, and somehow you have to have equitable sharing. And also there are unintended consequences. You could do something in New Rochelle that will solve something for a neighborhood and create a disaster over your border. So I think at the county level or at the state level, we need cooperation and some way to cost share so that these borders evaporate when we're dealing with this problem.
Well, you're correct, and that's why the county, without the legal authority to direct municipalities what to do, serves as a convener. You know, we get people around the table. It's David's, job, as you mentioned, the Newer Shell meeting. That's one of many meetings of that nature where you find out what each one of these communities are doing. We do run into the problem where the flooding problem is not as profound in some parts of the county, and so it's not a major issue in Community A. And they don't worry a whole heck of a lot about it, and when you get them to the table, they're not necessarily prepared to do something in Community A, either in terms of dollars or restriction of development, because they don't feel the problem, and it's, and what you get a lot of in this society, I'm sure you've seen it, is the whataboutisms. The minute you point something out to somebody, they go, well, what about this other thing? And so somebody will say, oh, well, you have a problem with flooding. Well, I have the jail in my community. What are you doing about that? Or I get the air flights under my house. And that's what happens in real terms in the county when you start saying it. On one issue, there are winners and losers, and another issue, there's another set of winners and losers. But I think, I take out of your comment, which was about the need to be regional in our approach to these things, that this is what we have been doing over the last couple of years. I will tell you, and this will be a little self-serving, so take it for what it's worth, but I think my administration has changed the direction in the way we've worked with municipal governments. And we have tried to become much more cooperative and engaged with local governments. The philosophy the prior administration was much more, with the county government, we're going to do what the county government has to do and our job, and if it's not in our scope of responsibilities, it's not our problem, it's somebody else's problem. And we haven't taken that approach. But now we have to show results to make that worthwhile. You've all been very gracious. Let me repeat, G. Latimer at westchestercountynY.gov. And I welcome the comments. Just be as explanatory as you can, because you want to know something specific, and you have to lay it out in the email, because I'm going to send it to somebody else rather than me try to explain it, and then we'll try to get an answer back to you. If you want to include other people, you've mentioned a few of you are from neighborhoods of people, include other people in it. I don't have any problem with, reply to all. We'll do what we can do. I think some of the suggestions that came out of here are worthwhile, and certainly a regional report to the community on where we are with flooding and update, maybe over the next 90 days would be a good thing we could do cooperatively. That would probably be helpful. You've all been very gracious. I expected people to be throwing things at me, so thank you for not throwing things at me.